Look, keep this show very short. Was very, very honored as Ricardo Osman here with us today at ABS. He's the founder and director of Harvard's Growth Lab. Part of the reason for his visit is a project that ABS and Joseph Peter are working together with him and lab. And so Professor Ricardo Osman will give a talk on solving the development puzzle, knowledge, technology, and economic complexity. At the end of it, there will be a very Q&A. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sutton.
Thank you. So it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with you, share some ideas on how we think about economic development. I'm here with my team. We're 7 in this trip, so I ask them just to raise your hand so that people know to approach you afterwards and maybe have some up conversation. Economic development of prosperity, becoming rich, and this question was a question that brought economic story. What is the secret of the world of nations? And this book was published in 1776. If you look in 1776, in his discussion, the world was the Netherlands, and it was about 3-4 times richer than the first country in the world. The gap between the richest and the poorest was about a factor of 3 or 4. And so, if you look at the poorest countries in the world these days, is Colombia. Okay, so if you multiply by 3 the income per capita of Burundi, and you get to Ethiopia. And if you multiply by 3 the income per capita of Ethiopia, you get to Morocco. So Morocco is like 9 times Burundi. And if you multiply by 3 Morocco, you get to Romania. And if you multiply by 3 Romania, you get to Australia. Okay, so probably that was a problem of, say, 3 to 1 has become a problem of 200 and something to 1. Okay? So you can say, well, if Adam Smith wrote the book about the wealth of nations, everybody read it, the problem should have gone away. But instead of going away, it has become 200 times later. So you have to ask yourself, what the hell happened? So if you look at the history of the world from a long-term perspective, this is the year 0 of the colonial. So in this GDP per capita of the world, you see it was essentially flat forever. So there was no history of economic growth until these last 200 years. And if we zoom into this period, we see that some places took off, others didn't take off. So when Adam Smith was writing over here, the gaps were small. But if you now measure the gaps here, gaps are huge. And, okay. So that means that there is a big pause on that we're not understanding of why countries are rich and why countries are poor. That means that in the world today, it's possible to take this picture and to take this picture. Now, if I ask you as a homework assignment,
go out and take a picture of a typewriter, a typing machine. Where would you go find the typing machine? A museum, right? Because sort of like superior technology displaces inferior technology. And so why has this technology survived why do things this way if you can do them this way? we'll leave that. But it's obvious if you say, what's the difference between these two guys? Well, one way to say the difference, and the standard way economists tell the difference, is that this guy is working with more land, he's working with more machine, more capital, he's working maybe with more human capital, and that, so he has more factors of production, and that's why you get more output. But what we know from growth accounting, that this explains a very small part of the story. So this idea that factor accumulation is the secret of growth has been shown both theoretically and empirically to be very partially so. So incoming other theories that say, no, the problem is not there. The problem is not so much in factor accumulation, might be in technology when we're going to talk about technology. But the reason why countries don't adopt good technologies is because they have lousy institutions. So this book is about institutions. And it says, see, some places have lousy institutions, so they don't have the right incentives to do things. And other places have good institutions, so they do have the right incentives to do things. And that's the reason why countries are rich and countries are poor. And they start this book. Chapter 1 is about a history of the story of the two Nogales. One is Nogales, Arizona, in the US, and the other one is Nogales, Sonora, in Mexico. And they're divided by a river, the Rio Grande. They're on both sides of the border. And they say, look, Nogales, Arizona is like 3 times richer than Nogales, Sonora. So what could be the difference? It has to be institutions. And the book kicks off with saying, but the book doesn't tell you is that if you go within Mexico to a state in the south, you'll find like the state of Guerrero. Okay, relatively poor state. If you multiply it by 2, the income per capita of the state of Guerrero, you get to the state of Sinaloa in Mexico. Famous because they have a cartel of drug traffickers, right? And if you multiply by 2 the state of Sinaloa, you get to the state of Guanajuato in Mexico. And if you multiply by 2 the state of Guanajuato, you get to the state of Nuevo León in Mexico. Guerrero has an income per capita like that of Honduras. Nuevo León has a productivity like that of Korea. So what did Acemoglu and Robinson tell us? It's all in the institutions. So I don't know what you want to call institutions, but this huge gap between Guerrero and Nuevo León in Mexico is compatible with the same legal framework, the same federal judicial system, the same political representation system, the same exchange rate, the same interest rate, the same macroeconomic setup, the same financial architecture. They actually have the same banks. So within a country, you can get these huge income differences. So how much is it all institutions? And if so, what the hell do you want to call institutions? Okay, so I'm going to argue that the whole difference in incomes, or not the whole difference, but so like the core of the explanation for why some places are rich and other places are poor is technology. Not institutions, but technology. The thing is that economists are a little bit like diplomats. Diplomats use words that hide disagreement. So because everybody wants to sign the communique at the end of the session, right? And they don't agree, so they use confusing words. And 2 of the most confusing words are institutions and technology, right? No one knows what do we mean by that. It sounds cool, both institutions and technology. They sound cool, but you don't know what we're talking about. So I'm going to argue that the problem is technology, but I'm going to define for you what I am going to call technology, okay? And I'm going to say that technology is what you might want to call productive knowledge. Technology is knowledge about how to do things in the world, how to change the world in ways that we want the world to look like. For example, you might be in front of this beautiful green pasture here, but you don't want a green pasture. You want a hamburger. And there are no hamburger trees, right? So if you want a hamburger, there's a lot of transformations of the world that you're going to have to do to transform the world as it is into the world as you want it to be, okay? And those transformations require knowledge about how to grow a cow, knowledge about how to grow wheat, knowledge of how to make bread, knowledge of how to make ketchup, knowledge of how to grow tomatoes, etc., etc. So a lot of knowledge. And this knowledge is going to take three forms or three ontologies, three forms of existence. It's going to exist in the form of tools. The knowledge necessary to make the tool is in some sense embodied in the tool. So you don't need to know how to make the tool to use the tool. Sort of like that knowledge has been stored there and you just need to use it. You don't need to know how to make the tool. So that's one form of technology. Another form of technology is codes, recipes, formulas, algorithms, how to do manuals, right? And there, this knowledge exists in some symbolic space, right? Here it's in ink over paper, but it's not in the ink and it's not in the paper. Actually, this is not ink over paper. This is a picture of ink over paper, but it doesn't change the meaning, right? So it exists really in this symbolic space, okay? And then the third form of knowledge exists in the form of well, before I go there, these tools are easy to ship around, right? You put them in a container, you send them to Malawi. Okay? These codes are even easier to share. You don't even have to put them in a container. You put them on the web and everybody that has access to the internet can get them. So if you have an internet connection in Malawi, you have all the codes, potentially. Okay? Now, ask yourself, what do you do when a tooth hurts? There's a potential parallel universe in which you will answer this question saying, well, it's very simple. Google it. Download an article from the web and follow the instructions, right? But you don't do that, do you? No? No, you actually go to a dentist, right? And the dentist uses tools. You see the tools there. The dentist follows protocols, so he follows some codified knowledge, but the dentist mixes the tools and the protocols with something you and I don't have, which is the ability to look into the mouth and see things we wouldn't see, and the ability to use those tools in ways we don't know how to use, right? That third thing is something that exists in the dentist's brain and maybe in the brain of other dentists, but nowhere else. It takes the form of know-how and brains. Okay? Now, a know-how doesn't move from brain to brain very easily. It's not like sending something on a container. It's not like sending somebody an email or a file, right? I put Rafa Nadal here, not only because I like him, but just to say that if you want to improve your tennis game, a conversation with Rafa Nadal is not going to be terribly helpful. It doesn't move, this know-how doesn't move from brain to brain like information. It's a particular wiring of the brain that takes a hell of a long time to get there, okay? And the problem of know-how is that it's not individual know-how that matters to do most things. It's team know-how. It's, you call your center is called collective intelligence. So it's collective know-how. It's knowledge that is dispersed in a group of people that coordinate to do things. Okay? So I'm going to say, and that's what this whole talk is going to be about, that the difference between rich countries and poor countries is about how much know-how they have. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about the odd things about how know-how exists, how it is accumulated, how it grows, etc., etc. Now, you might say, this lady here, she has the know-how necessary to implement that technology. But that is not true. Because to implement that technology back there, you need all these other people. Okay? So some technologies might be implemented by an individual. Most technologies are implemented by a collective, by teams, okay? So I'm going to ask myself the question, okay, I'm going to try to measure. Some countries have a lot of know-how, other countries have less know-how. How would you go about measuring know-how? Okay? So I'm going to compare two individuals. One is this Inuit from northern Canada. These are hunter-gatherer societies. Okay? Here's the Inuit engaged in the food industry. And here's the Inuit engaged in the construction industry. And here's the Inuit engaged in the transportation industry. And I want to compare the Inuit to modern man. And to ask yourself the question, who has more know-how? You say, that is a poorly formulated question, right? This guy, he uses glasses. He doesn't know how to make glasses. He uses a shirt. He doesn't know how to make shirts. He uses a computer, has no idea how to make a computer. He uses screens, has no idea how to make screens. He uses a headphone, doesn't know how to make a headphone. If you bring this guy here, there must be a mathematical theorem that proves that he will not survive, right? You don't know if he will starve to death or he will freeze to death, but he will not survive. So there is no meaningful way in which you can say that this guy here has more know-how than this guy is here, and that that's the reason why this guy is more prosperous. Okay? But it is possible to say that the society to which this guy belongs has more know-how than the society to which these guys belong, because the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make glasses, headphones, shirts, computers, etc. Right? He doesn't. He knows how to make an epsilon of that. Right? So in that sense, this know-how that I'm looking for is not an individual characteristic. It's a characteristic of a network. It's an emergent property of a collective. It does not really exist in the individual. And I argue that a lot of economics has focused on these individual level characteristics, like years of schooling and things like that, which are really intensive measures of something existing in a set, and not these extensive measures about systemic emergent properties of a group. So now let me convince you of a problem of how, knowledge has been on a hugely increasing path. The number of books ever written is growing exponentially. Our ability to read books compared to, say, I don't know, Isaac Newton, Adam Smith, or whoever, our ability to read books has not been growing. But the books to be written have been growing a lot. So to impress that idea on you, I'm going to talk about my employer. And my employer, Harvard, was founded in 1636. It's been a while. Now, 1636 was before Isaac Newton, was before Lavoisier, and chemistry, was before Thomas Hobbes and political science and Locke and everybody else, was before Linnaeus and biology and or Darwin or Pasteur, you name it. It was before everybody, right? You might ask yourself the question, what the hell were they teaching? Okay. So since there wasn't that much stuff to teach, the university was in this building. But now that we have so much more stuff to teach, we need more buildings. And we obviously needed more buildings. We needed even more buildings, right? So that's one way knowledge grows. We put it in more buildings. Okay? Now, in 1636, a college degree lasted 4 years. Now that we have hundreds of times more stuff to teach, a college degree probably, how long does it take? It's still 4 years. Still 4 years. So it's not that we have more time to teach. We have a lot of more stuff to teach, but we don't have more time to teach. So how did the system adapt to exploding knowledge? Well, we put different bits of knowledge in different heads. So these are the 50 majors that Harvard offers, but there are a bunch that MIT offers next door and that are not here and so on. So the idea is that knowledge grows not because you put more knowledge in each head, but because you put different bits of knowledge in different heads. So the growth of knowledge is achieved through the division of knowledge. Adam Smith called it the division of labor. But that kind of like, there was a bit, something was lost in translation. It's much clearer if you understand it as the division of knowledge. So we're going to put different bits of knowledge in different heads. And now you ask yourself the question, to do things, how are you going to use that knowledge? Well, you'll have to bring these bits of knowledge together again. You have to kind of like put Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? So some products can be done by a person. The knowledge that a person can have. We call it the amount of knowledge that a person can have. We don't call it a megabyte or a gigabyte or a terabyte, or we're going to call it a person byte. So if you have a product that requires 1 person byte of knowledge, well, it can be done by 1 person. But to create products that require more than 1 person byte, you need to bring people together. Okay? And this is done by creating networks of people we call firms. Like in ABS, they teach you accounting, they teach you finance, they teach you human resource management, they teach you taxes, they teach you production, they teach you marketing, branding, sales, contracts, right? So you need to span a lot of knowledge to run a modern business, right? So you need these different heads with different bits of knowledge collaborating in production. And because that's not enough, you need networks of firms that we call value chains. Okay, so you can ask yourself, how much knowledge is necessary to run a business? These are all family businesses. You can imagine each one of them to be run by a family. So the knowledge necessary to run these businesses is in the family. Okay? None of them can independently make a hamburger because the butcher doesn't know how to make bread and the baker doesn't know about meat, right? So, but but each business can be run as a family. There is no family that can run the production of these things. It requires much more than a family. The knowledge necessary to make them exceeds a family. And you might say that no country is able to make this product, because this product requires, all these inputs from all these companies that are spread out all these geographies. And you need to mobilize all of them, not because you're going to make many airplanes. You need to mobilize all of them if you want to make one airplane. So it's not an issue about economies of scale or anything. It's just that the knowledge needed to make a landing gear is very different from the knowledge needed to make a turbine, or the knowledge needed to make the avionics, or the knowledge needed to make these many, many things. So some products are not very knowledge intensive. You don't need that much knowledge to make them. And this, for example, is a huge company in China. They are making, you know what they're making? They're making chicken parts, right? The live chicken are over here, and then the chicken parts go over there, okay? But it's not very knowledge intensive, and we can figure out that because if we take this person and move him over here, take this person and move her over there, take that person, move her here, probably nothing will happen. They're sort of using the same person byte. You try to do the same exercise here, and you will hear the difference, okay? Because here, different people are bringing different bits of knowledge to the production of something, right? A person does not make a symphony. An orchestra plays a symphony. A person doesn't play a symphony, right? So I'm going to call this, I'm going to synthesize and get the bulk of my intuitions from this thing that we call the Scrabble theory of development. The Scrabble theory of development, by the way, this has been applied in different frameworks, and I think it's very powerful. But the idea is that products are like words. They are made by putting letters together. Think of these letters as these different units of person byte. Okay? So to make the word, you need all these letters, these person bytes, these productive capabilities. Okay? That's the basic idea. Now, we can now start deriving a bunch of implications from the simple metaphor. First implication is that if you only have one letter, there aren't too many words you can make. In the English language, you can make this one word. But if I give you these 3 letters, now you can make 4 words, and you can make up to 3-letter words, right? If I just give you 1 extra letter, now you make 9 words, and you can make 4-letter words. If I give you these 10 letters, we checked the Scrabble website. It says that you can make 595 different words in the English language. And you can make words that are up to 10 letters long. Okay, so the more letters you have, the more words you can put together, and the longer the words that you can put together. Okay? So let's go back here and ask ourselves the question, what do you see? Who has more know-how? Who has more know-how? Yeah?
You can assess that on the right image there is more fragments of know-how that are set together.
Exactly, because if it was how much know-how do each one of them has individually, you will say, well, maybe this guy, he knows how to take care of his own bull, he knows how to repair his own tools, he maybe makes his own tools, he makes his own fertilizer with dung. Don't tell OCP. Right? This guy over here, he probably knows how to drive this machine. He doesn't know how to make this machine. This machine is, I don't know, it's like the airplane I showed you before, right? And the machine uses gasoline. He doesn't have no idea how to look for oil, how to extract the oil, how to refine the oil. He doesn't know anything of that. He uses genetically modified seeds. He doesn't know what that means. He uses agrochemicals, he uses insecticides, he uses a bunch of stuff, right? This guy, as an individual, is not impressive. This guy, you know, when the machine breaks down, he knows the phone number of whom to call. Okay? So there is no practical way in which you can say that this guy has more know-how than that guy. But this guy is obviously mobilizing a ton more knowledge than that guy in the process of production. He's mobilizing the knowledge that went into a tractor, into the gasoline, into the fertilizers, into the seeds, into everything, okay? So that's why I say when you look at these differences in income, what you're really looking at is in the amount of distributed knowledge that gets mobilized in production, okay? So this is going to be my description of the world. The world is made out of three types of things, okay? It's made out of letters, call them productive capabilities. It's made out of places. Places have subsets of these letters. And it's made out of products. Products are made by combinations of these letters. Okay? Now, suppose that this is my view of the world. This is what the world is made out of. Then you would ask yourself the question, when I look at different places in the world, what am I looking at? Well, if I look at different places in the world, I'm going to be looking at places that have different letters and consequently can make different words. So in this example, you have 3 places and you have 5 different products. Now here you can observe that the place at the top, the country at the top has a lot of letters. The country at the bottom has very few letters. What would you expect? Well, the country at the top, since they have many letters, they should be able to make many things. And in fact, this country here makes all 5 products. This country here can only make the hat, right? By the same token, hat is a very short word. It's a 3-letter word. And guess what? Everybody makes hats in this world. So hat is made by everybody. But pharmaceuticals is a very long word. We actually cheated because, no. So pharmaceuticals is only done by one country. And it's done by which country? The country that has a lot of letters. Okay? So we call the number of products that a country makes or a place makes, we call it the diversity of the place. And that's easily observable. We have data sets where we can go out and measure these things. The reverse of that is the number of countries that make a product. Like for a hat, it would be 3. For pharmaceuticals, it would be 1. We call that the ubiquity of a product. Okay, how many places are able to make the product? With the idea that the harder it is to make something, the fewer the places that will be able to make it. Okay? So here we come up with a set of theorems, if you want. That first one is that countries that have more letters should be more diversified. They should be, you have more productive capabilities, you have more letters, you can make more words, you can make more products, you should be more diversified. Products that require more letters are going to be harder to make. They're going to be made in fewer places. They're going to be less ubiquitous. Countries that have more letters should be able to make longer words. You should be able to make products that are less ubiquitous, right? So what we should observe is that as country gets more letters, they're able to make more words, but also longer words, products that are less ubiquitous. So we can look at how many products a place makes, and we can look at how many other places can make the things that you make. How ubiquitous are the things that you make? And lo and behold, this is what we get. That this is how many products you make. This is how many other countries make the things you make. And you have all the rich countries are over here. They make many things and things that are done in few places. And poor countries are over there. They make few things and things that are done everywhere. And that's what you would expect if the problem is a problem of this, how much of the dictionary, how much of the alphabet do you have? Okay. Now, we can do this at the national level and think of a place as a country, but we can look at it at the regional level. And for example, this is Mexico, and these are states in Mexico. So this is Nuevo León that I talked to you about before, and the federal district, they make many things and things that are done in few places. And I talked to you about Guerrero is over here. They make few things and things that are done everywhere. So these are places that differ in the completeness, if you want, of their letter set. Okay? And so this is Mexico. This is Sri Lanka. These are districts in Sri Lanka. Tim O'Brien who's here with us, was involved in that project too. These are municipalities in Chile. At the municipal level, this is Santiago, Las Condes, and Providencia are three of the municipalities of Metro Santiago. And up there at the top left is where the penguins live. Okay. This is Turkey. Okay, so you have 400 kinds of industries that exist in Istanbul and not in Izmir, and 100 industries that exist in Izmir and not in Ankara. And up there is the southeastern Kurdish region, the poorest parts of Turkey. We didn't tell the system, how rich you are or anything. We just counted how many different things you do. And I don't know if you know any of these places here, okay? But, and I don't know if any will feel offended by their position here, right? But this we hope to do with better data, but we had access to the Orbis data set firms, and our team took the Orbis data set for Morocco, and this is what came out. Okay, so that means that there's enormous diversity in the kinds of letters that are in different parts of the country. Okay. So you might say, okay, so now you've convinced us that there's something about describing the world with this paradigm, okay? Now I want to say, some places have more letters, other places have fewer letters. How would you measure how many letters does a country have? Well, we already have an intuition, right? A place that has many letters is a place that makes many things, is highly diversified, but also that is able to make things that are hard to make, long words, right? Things that are low ubiquity, but in places that are making things that are low ubiquity means that they have a lot of letters. They should also be more diversified. So with Cesar Hidalgo back in 2009, we came up with a way of synthesizing this information into an index, which we call the Index of Economic Complexity. And this is a heat map of economic complexity in the world. Okay? So red is kind of bad. I'm from Venezuela, so pretty red. You have more letters. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay. So you might ask yourself the question, okay, I have now independently measured the letters that a country has. Does the letters that a country have anything to do with their income per capita? Well, you guess sort of like maybe yes, because Germany is very blue and West Africa is very red. So, and we know that this place is much poorer than that. So your intuition might say, yes, these things are correlated, but impressions are not as good as data. So this is the actual data. So here is our economic complexity index. We're controlling for your natural resource income. And this is your income per capita controlling for natural resource income. And it's not bad, no? An R square of 0.68, you would say, no, not bad, but there's 0.32 between 0.68 and 1. So maybe the theory is wrong or is incomplete. And I would maybe jokingly say, maybe it's not that the theory is wrong, it's that the world is wrong. That the theory is right and the world hasn't figured it out. In the sense that here you have India. You'd say, India, why are you so poor? Given the letters you had, you should be richer, you should be up here, right? Or you say, hey, here is Greece. How did you get to be so rich given how little you know? Well, what do we know? We know that over the past 20 years, India has grown a lot, and Greece is poorer than it was 20 years ago. So we would argue that these differences from the regression line actually predict where you're going. If you have the letters to be richer than they are, you will become richer. But if you don't have the letters to be as rich as you are, you'll have trouble growing and maybe go back. We have shown that these gaps are predictive of future growth. Okay? So we like to say that it's a little bit, Pindar was a pre-Socratic philosopher that Nietzsche liked a lot. And Nietzsche always quoted Pindar. Pindar had this famous phrase saying, become who you are. Become who you are. It's cool, no? Come here. In some sense, you already are what you are. You just have to express it. So if you're a country that has the letters, you will become your letters. You will become as rich as your letters, right? So this says that. Now, unfortunately, Morocco is here. It's on the regression line. So it means it's not like India, that it already has the letters to be richer than you want to be, right? So it's not going to be pulled by the fact that it has already the letters. So the next question you're going to ask me is how do I get the letters? But before I go there, let me just show you. So these are the predictions of future growth based on these gaps between what you know how to do and how rich you are. Here, what we show is we've divided the world into 5 quintiles of countries in terms of their growth rates. And these are growth rates measured relative to the US. So if you stayed at 1, it means that you grew as much as the US. Like this third quintile, grow as much as the US. So the first quintile closed the gaps enormously with the US. The second quintile barely grew a little bit faster than the US. The third quintile grew as much as the US, and the other 2 quintiles fell behind. When you look at what happened to the complexity of these places, you find exactly the same thing. That only the first quintile really went up. The second quintile marginally, and the others kind of fell behind. So this says that in the explanation for why countries grew or didn't grow, there's something about what happened to their complexity. That were they able to accumulate letters, express them in more words, express them in longer words, etc. Okay, so when we look at Morocco, this is the ranking of Morocco in our economic complexity index. So here up is good, but it means a lower letter. So we rank you at 81. And you've been around that place for some time. as opposed to, say, for example, Turkey that has been moving up, and so on. So it means, okay, so we need to worry about the growth of letters in Morocco. So you might ask yourself the question, okay, so how do I get letters? And here we would argue that the problem of getting letters is associated with this well-known problem. This is a picture to illustrate the idea of the chicken and egg problem, but people often complain that this is not a chicken but a rooster. But anyway, so what's the chicken and egg problem? To make watches, you need watchmakers. But how do you become a watchmaker in a place that doesn't make watches? Why would you ever want to become a watchmaker in a place that doesn't make watches? But how could you become a watchmaker? If nobody's making watches, nobody probably knows how to make watches. So in order to do something you were not doing before, you have to know how to do it in order to do it. But since you weren't doing it before, you don't know how to do it. So how do you start doing things that you weren't doing before? If to do them, you have to know how to do them, and you don't know how to do them, okay? So that, we think, is the fundamental problem that slows down progress. This, if you want, coordination problem. And I'm going to say that this coordination problem has something to do with this classification problem. Here, there are two animals that are highly related to each other, and one animal that is out of the group. And I would ask you, which one is out of the group? The bear. Yes, because this is the African Business School, and you know that the lion and the zebra come from Africa, right? Or you might say, the biologists among you might say, no, you see, the zebra eats grass. So it's no. But I told you that the right theory of the world is the Scrabble theory of the world. And in the Scrabble theory of the world, a zebra is just a bear with a Z. So if you want to go from bear to zebra, you have 4 of the 5 letters. You only need to solve one chicken and egg problem. But if you want to go from bear to lion, you have 4 letters that are useless, and you need 4 letters you don't have. So you have to solve 4 chicken and egg problems. Okay, so this gives you the idea that there are some things that are in some sense close to what you already know how to do, and other things that are very far from what you already know how to do. So I want to be able to represent practically that intuition. And to do that, I need to create sort of like a map of technology. And this map of technology is going to be like the map of a forest, where every product is like a tree. And in this map, bear and zebra are going to be relatively close to each other because they only differ in 1 letter, while bear and lion are going to be far away from each other in this forest. I want to get a sense of these distances in the forest. And that's working with some colleagues in 2007, we came up with the idea of the product space. This product space is, if you want, a map of technology. Every circle here is a product. The size of the circle is proportional to international trade in that product, okay? And they're connected with these lines to other products. In this estimation, if the countries that are good at product A are also good at product B. No. Countries that export right-hand side shoes tend to export left-hand side shoes, which probably means that they use the same letters, right? So this here is garments. This here is agro-processed food. This here is construction materials. This here is machinery. These are cars and these are trucks. This here is chemicals, and this here is electronics. And then there's a periphery of products that are very poorly connected, like this is oil, big, fat, etc. But it's very poorly connected. That means that if you know how to make one kind of machine, it's kind of like easy to figure out how to make other kinds of machines. If you know how to make one kind of garment, it's easy to make other kinds of garments. But if you know how to make oil, it means that you know how to make holes on the ground. Anybody else who needs a hole on the ground, I'm sure they'll give you a call. Okay, so products are going to differ not only in how complex they are, in how many letters they require, but also in how well, that is, if you knew how to make that product, how many other things could you get close to, okay? How connected. Okay, but now that I've shown you a picture of technology, product space, okay? You might want to say, but I don't care about technology, I care about my country. How can I represent my country in this space? Well, this is my country, okay? So this is the product space, and I've just colored the places where Venezuela is good at. And you see that it looks like Venezuela is good at very few things, right? Compared to, say, Spain. Okay? So there's Venezuela and there's Spain, okay? And you see immediately Spain knows how to make a lot more than Venezuela does. So if I were now to ask Morocco, so there's Morocco. So much better than Venezuela, right? So here's your garment industry, here are your cars, etc. The purple things is your chemicals, OCP and stuff, okay? So let me show you a picture of how you would describe the growth process in my language, okay? Here I'm comparing Ghana. Anybody here from Ghana? Anybody here from Thailand? No. Okay, so nobody will get offended. Okay, so they both started very similar levels of income back in 1962. Now, Ghana did better in education than Thailand. So these are years of schooling of the labor force. Ghana beat Thailand in this period. And education in Ghana is in English. And there are more people around the world speaking English than people around the world speaking Thai. So you would have said, okay, it's human capital. Human capital is education. We know what's going to happen. But we're going to tell the story by looking a little bit differently at the data. So here's Ghana. This is what Ghana was good at in terms of their export basket back in 1962. So they had cocoa beans, wood, and manganese. So all very natural based minerals and agriculture. And this was Thailand's export basket in 1962. Very similar colors, more diversity. They had rice, they had maize, they had vegetables, they had sugar, they had fish, they had rubber, jute, no? And they had a little bit of this stuff, but in 92% natural-based products. And this is where they were in the product space in 1965. Okay, so here I'm letting in the background the product space. I'm highlighting these places where they have capabilities. So I'm now going to show you a movie. Okay? So I need you to pay attention to where these dots are. So this 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 19, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010. What did you see? First, obviously, you saw much more dynamism on the left than on the right. But let me show you now, slow motion, what was happening. Here, suddenly you get these two firms in the garment sector in Thailand. Garment sector is a very connected sector. So by 1975, you have all of these. By 1980, you have even more. And now suddenly you have these two firms now producing electronics in 1980. By 1985, by 1990, they've taken over that whole cluster over there. And they start moving here to the center. So now that they are here in the much more higher value part of the product space, machinery and stuff, they start abandoning garments. Here you see very little change, right? So this was Ghana's exports in 1962, and this is Ghana's exports in 2010. So you see that there is diversification, but from cocoa beans to cocoa butter to cocoa paste to unsweetened cocoa powder, right? Some bananas, some nuts, some fish, some minerals. If you look at exports per capita in constant dollars, it looks like this. There was no growth in exports per capita in constant dollars. Okay. So let's look at Thailand. This was Thailand in 1962. I already showed you this. This is Thailand in 2010. So notice that these colors are still there. But a lot of other stuff appeared. Okay? So these are exports per capita in Thailand in constant dollars. It started at $50. It ended up at $2,500. Went up by a factor of 50. Okay? So, and by the way, remember, it was not the difference in years of schooling. It was not the difference in years of schooling. So in GDP per capita, they diverged. And today, Thailand is more than 6 times richer than Ghana in GDP per capita. Okay? So how do we explain growth? Well, countries converge to a level of income that can be supported by the letters that they have. Therefore, the gaps between the income and letters affects future growth. So India, we expect to grow faster than Greece. Okay? But long-run growth should be affected by the accumulation of more letters. And the accumulation of more letters will depend on how easy it is to accumulate those letters. You notice that a lot of the time in Thailand, monkeys, these dots were jumping to nearby trees. If you're in a well-connected part of the forest, it's very easy for you to move around. Okay? And that depends on where are these countries positioned in the product space. So this is Morocco in 1995 and Morocco in 2021. So in Morocco in 1995, you were exporting $9.6 billion. In Morocco, now is exporting $54 billion. So it's gone up by a factor of 6 or so. Okay. There's been some diversification. This is the cars. These are electronics and so on. But so these are the exports of Morocco, the new exports, things that were not there 15 years ago that are now there. It represents 11% of your export baskets are new products. Morocco added 19 products to its export basket, representing $6 billion in exports, $164 per capita. And it's those things you see there. Now, Morocco's income per capita, compared to the US, here we're taking the US as a benchmark, is significantly lower than some of its comparators, okay? So the country has been converging. I put this in logarithmic terms. So this is 10% of US income. This is 20%, this is 30%, this is 40 and 50, you know? it went from something like 7% of US income per capita to something like 13% of US income per capita. So it has been catching up, but still with huge gaps. Okay. But these gaps have been narrowing much, much less than some of these other gaps. For example, in life expectancy, you are almost at 100% of the US. In urbanization rate, you're at about almost 80% of the US. In years of schooling, you're at 50% of the US. In tertiary enrollment, you're at something like 50% of the US. But in income per capita, you're at 13% of the US. And if we look at scientific papers, you're about 10% of the US. And if you look at patents, you're flat at 1% of the US. So I think that this tells us a little bit about what's not happening and what is happening. So the progress that has been made, so a lot of progress in healthcare and life expectancy and so on, urbanization, progress in education, but the gaps are still significant, 50% of US level. For example, in Latin America, we are, say, 90% of US educational levels. And we are at 20, 30% of US income per capita. No? So still gaps there. But the gap in income per capita seems much larger than the gap in the other things. I think I'm out of time. I'm having a lot of fun, but I just wanted to tell you before I open it up to questions and comments. I told you it's the letters. I told you it's easier to get letters if you move from bear to zebra than if you try to move from bear to lion. So we know where you are in the product space, so we can know the things that are in what we like to, well, Stuart Kaufman coined the term, in your adjacent possible. So what are things are in your adjacent possible? We can use that to think of strategy and so on. But there's several ways of accelerating knowledge diffusion. And all of them are based on the idea that it's really hard to move know-how into brains. Remember Rafa Nadal? Hard to move know-how into brains, but it's very easy to move brains. So brain mobility is key to technological mobility. If you want to play a symphony and you don't have a violinist, it's very easy to bring in a violinist. And once you have the violinist, he can train maybe the next violinist. If you don't have a watchmaker, you bring in a watchmaker, then he'll train the next watchmaker. But you solve the chicken and egg problem by bringing in some brains. And we've done a lot of work on these processes. And these processes depend on FDI. FDI, you can bring in knowledge, but it's very important for that knowledge to spread after it comes in. Migration is an important source of knowledge. Everybody wants to become Silicon Valley. But what they did not tell you about Silicon Valley is that 54% of the STEM workers of Silicon Valley are foreigners. And the other 46% are not Californians, even though California is a state that has more population than Morocco. Only 18% of the STEM workers of Silicon Valley are Californians. Okay? So it means that even in these places that have a lot of talent, it's not that they have a lot of talent because they created a lot of talent, but because they attracted a lot of talent. And Morocco has a very, very low rate of immigration. And the third thing that we have studied a lot is the role of diasporas. Diasporas know here, know there, and can look arbitrage the knowledge gaps and so on. So diasporas can play a very important role in dynamizing know-how acquisition. So these are the three of the mechanisms that we have been studying to see how we can kickstart or accelerate the growth process. So let me stop there. So I've told you that the secret of the prosperity, the secret of wealth is knowledge, that knowledge takes the form of tools, codes, and know-how. If it wasn't for the know-how, the world would be flat. We would have sent the tools everywhere, to Malawi, to Burundi. We would have sent the codes everywhere, put them on the web. Everybody would have had access to technology. The world would be flat. But know-how, knowledge depends on collective know-how, which is this distributed thing. And this distributed thing depends on, you cannot have, a watchmaker cannot survive in a place that doesn't make watches, and a place cannot make watches without the watchmaker, right? So it's very important to be able to embed this know-how, this distributed knowledge in the social network. And this happens parsimoniously, gradually, and so on. These countries move small distances in this product space. They tend to move from bear to zebra, right? But this gives us enough tools to think about strategy and how to move forward and so on. So let me stop there. All ears. Yes.
Thank you, Professor, for this wonderful talk. I have 3 lines of thoughts. So economic complexity would drive growth. What about the rate of growth? I mean, are there factors that we know that determine rate of growth? That's number one. The second point about what about collective intent? If the whole crowd knows where to go, perhaps they can connect better, they can co-create better, and then drive productivity. And third dimension, how do economies discover their comparative advantage? Maybe they have it, they just don't know. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
No, excellent 3 questions. So I should have written them down. The first one was a rate of growth. No, I think that the rate of growth. So in the standard models in economics, they would say the solo model. They would say, well, you need to save to be able to afford the tools and the machines and so on. But in a world where there's so much capital mobility, once, I don't know, Guyana just found oil, capital is abundant, right? If something is going to be profitable, capital is not going to be the binding constraint. If human capital is not there, you can bring it there. So I would say that the key is, in some sense, the third point you mentioned, the ability to bring people together first. For people to try to play this game as opposed to trying to shoot at anybody who tries to move in this space, no? So there's something about a level of cohesion that facilitates these explorations to happen. And you correctly mentioned that exploration is key. You a priori don't know if this transition is from bear to zebra or from bear to lion, right? So people experiment, and what we observe is the successful experiments, and we know, and we've estimated that what's the probability of succeeding in an attempt if the product you're trying to get to is farther away or closer by than another product. So we can estimate some of these probabilities of success, but it involves exploration. Sometimes we say if the product space is like a forest, products are like trees, firms are like monkeys, that they live on these trees, they live off of these trees, they exploit certain products, right? So we think this diffusion, like the way Thailand moved in the product space, we think of them as monkeys jumping from tree to tree, right? So it's this diffusion process in the space. And if these monkeys are in well-connected part of the product space, there are many small jumps that they can do one after the other and get very far. right? If you are more in the periphery of the product space, then it's harder to move because the next tree is very far away. But we estimate, and that's the reason why I showed you this graph where what percentage of your exports are new and what are those new exports. These are the new monkeys that jumped. Some countries are well located in the product space but have lazy monkeys. They are well positioned, but the monkeys are not jumping. Others are jumping a lot, conditional on how well positioned they were. So I think that the sociology of innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on is something we have not studied more of. We can measure, we can sort of come up with a metric of saying, how jumpy are your monkeys, okay? But we have not really studied of what underpins the jumpiness of monkeys. We have anecdotes and stories. You know, they say that the plural of anecdote is data. You know, so we have some anecdotes, but we think that some of the things that you were mentioning, a sense of social cohesion, a sense of purpose, and so on, might facilitate and a sense of also of legitimacy of these things. In a previous meeting, one of the professors here mentioned that, you know, you're trying to do some new business in the Atlas Mountains to open up a bed and breakfast, and you can't get a permit for a well, or, you know, and so you get stopped by the ecosystem. So those are things to also work on or facilitate. Yes.
So you've mentioned some drivers for the drivers of growth in a knowledge-based economy, and I want to zone in the idea of volatility of growth acceleration, and sometimes what can a country do to optimize its strategy to move in, let's say, to the analogy of the logic of Scrabble's new letters, so new products that are still not yet well connected to other letters. So what would be the best strategy for this country to move from its current letters to new ones?
So when we advise on industrial strategy, we like to develop two kinds of metrics. One metric we associate with feasibility, and other metrics we associate with attractiveness. Okay, so what would be the value of moving in a certain direction? So you realize that, for example, you were already here, so moving to here sounded like possible, and you did move there, right? So, so this was a relatively feasible jump to try to develop the car industry. You can realize that this space here is already pretty much taken. And it's not a very attractive sector because here you're competing with Ethiopia in garments and with Lesotho and so on. So it may not support the kind of wages you wish you could pay in Morocco, right? So these tools can be used, and actually all of this comes from our Atlas of Economic Complexity, which is online and does all these calculations for you. So it develops these metrics of attractiveness. We call it the strategic value of a thing. So for example, suppose that these two products were, say, this product here and this product here were equally distant from you. But obviously, if you jump to this product, first of all, it's a big product, and secondly, it's close to many other things. Well, if you jump here, there's nothing nearby. So this gives a sense of, you know, this would be a more strategic jump than that jump. So it helps you orientate yourself in this space. And then the question is, okay, you need an agent of change that is going to try to make these things. Who's that agent of change? And that's why we say maybe it's FDI, maybe it's a foreign company that you want to attract to come here. But once they come here, you don't want the knowledge to remain only inside the company. You want that knowledge to spread. And one of the stories that I didn't tell you was what happened in in Bangladesh with their garment industry. Bangladesh was this country exporting jute, essentially, and almost none of it. Very, very poor. And in comes Daewoo and decides to make garments in Bangladesh. And the way they decide to make garments in Bangladesh is they take 126 Bangladeshi workers to a 6-month training program in Korea. In 1979, by 1988, 56 of these people had left to create their own company. So what happened there was not the growth of Daewoo. It was the growth of these 56 spin-offs from Daewoo. And when you look at the exports of Bangladesh, so now it's 90% of these exports, and the bulk of them coming from, if you want, children of Daewoo. So that's why I say you attracted the knowledge to the country. They had to create a team to be able to implement that. But then people can take that idea in other directions. And you don't have to be a poor country like Bangladesh. That's what happened in the US. In the US, the car industry in Detroit occurred because Oldsmobile went to Detroit, and people who worked at Oldsmobile ended up creating Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors, right? Or the people who went to Silicon Valley, the first people who went to Silicon Valley, went with this guy, Shockley. They left Shockley to create their own firms, and these guys created Intel, all of these companies. So first of all, it started in California because these guys came from New Jersey, moved from New Jersey to California. And then within California, it's because the brains moved from company to company. It's not because some people are saying, oh, look at what they do, I'm going to do the same. It's like saying, oh, look at what Rafa Nadal does, I'm going to do the same. Doesn't work that way. The brains move from firm to firm. So you want to make sure that the knowledge spreads so that more people can work with that knowledge and make it grow. Yes?
What about the problem of neocolonialism, for example? Other countries taking relations and using it, doing that via moderation of that relationship.
Tell me a little bit about how I should understand neocolonialism.
For example, I'm another country, I take your country, I will take something that you know how, something that you know how to do. And,
So, I don't know. So, for example, when foreign companies came to Venezuela to extract oil, first of all, we didn't know we had oil. Had we known that we had oil, we would not have known how to extract it. Had we known how to extract it, we would not have known what to use it for, because we would not have known how to refine it. And had we known how to refine it, still somebody had to invent the car, the internal combustion engine, because if without an internal combustion engine, before the internal combustion engine was invented, they were using oil to make kerosene for lighting. And John D. Rockefeller wanted to kill Alexander Bell, because Alexander Bell invented electricity and it was displacing. So you have a natural resource that is only valuable in the context of a lot of human knowledge. So the colonialists, as you want to call it, came in a country that was one of the poorest countries in Latin America. And within 2 generations, we were the richest country in Latin America. We eventually expropriated the foreign companies and made it into a state-owned enterprises. But I don't see how to go from not knowing anything, to being a major oil exporter and so on, without partnering with those with the knowledge. In the same way as Daewoo brought in the knowledge and then the knowledge spread. So I think that a lot of the discourse on neocolonialism does not recognize the amount of agency your country has in playing the cards it has been dealt. And a lot of the discourse is an excuse of why you didn't do it more than an action plan on how to do it. You had a question.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to go back to that notion of genesis of knowledge and how it takes to places, because it is where the chief is kind of live. So skilled workers emigrating from Morocco has increased over the past 5 years. And it's inevitable and it's consistent with your economic focus and index ranking, because there's a generalized feeling that things are not moving, fast enough for their ambitions. And so far, Morocco has attempted very sparsely to bring diaspora back, mainly through sense-making and patriotism efforts. But Morocco also has conflicting development goals, because that diaspora also sends capital back to Morocco, and that feeds into its development. So in your opinion, should Morocco deter skilled workers to leave Morocco? And if so, how should it do it, given the urgency of development, but also the impatience of that talented pool?
So, the fact that you are a relatively poor country surrounded by much richer places is part of the determinant of your development. And the question is, how can you use it to some extent to accelerate your development? We did a lot of work on Albania. Albania was the North Korea of Europe. It had sort of like, when the Gang of Four was kicked out of power in China, it was the only Maoist government in the world, okay, in 1978, and stayed as the most extreme communist country in the world until communism was overthrown in 1919. When communism fell, 30% of the people left the country. They went to Italy, they went to Greece, they went elsewhere, etc. We started working in Albania in 2013. The country was going more or less nowhere, etc. Since then, the country has been growing by leaps and bounds. Okay, so they're converging, all the numbers look good, etc. They have this problem of people that left. People that left 20 years later suddenly has a lot of skills, a lot of capital, a lot of possibilities. They know Albania, they know the rest of the world. They have been, some of them, moving back to Albania or investing in Albania. So when Tim O'Brien in the team we wanted to know how important was the diaspora or return migration in the business development that we were seeing in Albania. He did a small survey of something like 30 or 40 firms to see what percentage of them were returnees or people with connections, etc. And essentially 100% were returnees. So it is part of, if you manage it well, it can be part of the process of catching up. If you look at the work of Annalisa Xenian from Berkeley, she wrote a beautiful book called The New Argonauts. And the book tells a story of how Bangalore, Hyderabad, Taiwan, Korea developed because of people who went to work at Silicon Valley. Some of them, interestingly, didn't have their visas renovated, so they had to go back. And when they went back, they established their business back home, and they were connected already. And so a lot of the developments you see in India, in the IT sector, happened as a spillover of these things that Indians call NRIs, non-resident Indians. So there is I think that there's a lot to be said about the diaspora. And I would say too much research has been done on diaspora and remittances. And not enough research has been done on diaspora and technological diffusion, business model diffusion, trade, investment, and so on, which is, I think, where a lot of the macro action comes from. So I would say you need a diaspora strategy. It may not be just patriotism and so on. By the way, now we did a study, it's on the web, on the Colombian diaspora. And what I liked about that study is its methodology, because we explored many different ways of capturing that diaspora. But we identified like 5 million people. But if you look at 65,000 of them, 65,000 is small relative to 5 million. But 65,000 highly capable people could be really transformative for the country. And so we interviewed a few of them. And one of them told us, look, he's a unicorn in Silicon Valley, a IT guy. He said he went to Colombia to receive an award. And because he went to Colombia to receive an award, he was in the newspapers. And because he was in the newspapers, many people sent him their CVs. And because he got so many CVs, he said, I'm going to open up a shop here in Colombia to hire all this talent. That talent, he would not have thought about Colombia had he not been Colombian, right? He would not have been there had you not recognized him. But once the connection gets done, you can get a lot of action here. 18 years ago, I did a study on Morocco. And the big thing in those days that was new and growing fast was call centers. So we went and visited a few call centers. And I asked him, where did you get the business? So he said, look, I have a cousin in Paris. So all these call centers were in French. The bulk of the call centers are in English. So these call centers were in French. A bunch of Moroccans, they had a cousin in Paris. That's the kind of development that can happen in the context of having a diaspora. I went to Algeria and I asked the same question, where are the call centers? He said, what call centers? No call centers. He said, well, but don't you have a cousin in Paris? And he said, no, that's not a cousin, that's a traitor. So they have a bad relationship with their diaspora and they don't get the benefits of that diaspora. So it's also a lesson that these things you say, it's, you know, the sense of belonging and identity and so on and recognition is part of the glue that makes it work. So I think there's a lot more that you can get from deepening the relations with the diaspora. And by the way, we did a project in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a big diaspora. You know, part of the problem is that the diaspora came out of a civil war. And many in the diaspora lost the civil war. So we don't want anything to do with Sri Lanka, right? But we got, I came to be visited by a bunch of Sri Lankan faculty in the US who said, you know, we are retiring, etc. We want to open up a university in Sri Lanka. Tell us about it, connect us, etc. So the diaspora is there. It can be transformative, but you need to make it happen. You need the connections to happen. And once it happens, it can be very transformative. Yes.
Firstly, thank you for this opportunity and presentation. We learned a lot. So I have a question about the way how to ensure that the division of knowledge is done the way it should be. That means the perfect or the most benefit way that we serve the growth. Should we have some kind of control in order to ensure the best equilibrium? It means everyone serves himself within the society, or just let it teach here and let everybody try to come with the best for himself.
So I think this is a social process of search. There are two processes going on. One process is that in order to know enough about a field to push the border, you have to specialize. So back when, there was a field called philosophy. And, Aristotle wrote the bulk of his work, most of his books were on biology. None of that survived. Aristotelian biology is useless, right? Science has evolved much more. But, he was doing moral philosophy, logic, etc., right? That became the difference between science and the humanities and philosophy, and then science became divided into biology, chemistry, physics, and then that became into microbiology, evolutionary biology, etc. No? And physics became, engineering and electrical engineering. And so you see how this process has been branching, no? So if you are an econometrician, I'm an economist, so I know my field, I know how it is splitting, no? How it's dividing. So there are some people who specialize in econometrics, some people who specialize in randomized control trials, some people who specialize in macro, some people who specialize in different things. And so there's this process of branching of knowledge into different things. And then you have to invent a degree. You want to invent a degree. Like, for example, we invented this Master in Public Administration and International Development. We call it the MPAID. Then we have to ask a question, what should a person in this field need to know? So we teach them a year of micro, a year of macro, a year of econometrics, political science, public management, legal stuff. And so we teach them all of that. Now, the people who teach in the program don't necessarily talk to each other, right? They are, each one publishing in different journals, doing different things. But we need to kind of like bring that knowledge together to have a person know enough to be effective in his field. So there is branching of knowledge because people tend to specialize in different areas and the whole covers more because each individual does different things. But then you need to create a usable knowledge in the brains of your students for which you have to integrate different pieces of the knowledge. So I think that the world is constantly reinventing and redesigning educational programs, coming up with new ones, etc., as we think that knowledge can be usefully used. So I don't think it's a process that can be centrally planned. It's too the knowledge needed to plan anything is just too decentralized. And it's just, you have to be aware that as you create programs, society answers back. Some of them grow a lot, like in Ben-Gvir, you have this program on coding that is successful and rapidly growing and so on, because the world seems to need more of that. But everybody is shutting down their departments of art history and other things like that because the market does not appreciate them as much, no? So they become smaller programs and can sustain fewer professors. So I think that's a little bit the dynamic that underpins this process.
So I think we're a little bit
way before
over time, but we're really, really grateful, and we thank you a lot for this talk, and thank you everyone for questions and for attending.